Nice podcast.
What is up, everybody? Once again, and as always, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Irrational Fears. I am your co-host, Anthony Luciano, and we're going to go right into the next episode of 31 Days of Horror. This one is called Lessons I Learned from the Eagle Creek Fire by Matthew Shuck. I sat on the bar stool and shook the ash from my hat while waving to Jenny on the other side of the counter. She had my drink finished before the air in the vinyl cushion had time to come out, causing the old familiar lumps in the seat to make themselves known to my legs. Someone sat in my seat today, I thought as I reached for the bourbon with my shaking fingers. One drink to stop the shakes, another to mute the memories that the first drink brought to the forefront of my mind. Jenny knew the drill. I didn't mind that someone had sat in my stool. After all, it couldn't have been one of the regulars. They'd have known better. I imagined Sam had waddled over after a couple minutes to shoo the wayward tourist or photographer away. I'd seen a lot of them lately, coming to gawk at our livelihood as it burned to the ground. "We're closing early, Marshall." Jenny interrupted my reverie. "Word has it they're gonna upgrade the evacuation level to a 3 soon." "Are you still gonna charge me for the drinks?" I asked. My voice came out gruffer than I'd expected it to be, and I cleared my throat. The smoke lingered in the air outside, and ash settled on everything like a gray snow. It tickled my throat. "Are you kidding me?" Jenny said as she poured another bourbon and passed it to me. "If they make it mandatory, I'm taking the till and 2 bottles from the top shelf with me." I laughed less at her joke and more at the sardonic tone she used. The bar was all Jenny had left after her husband died, and I could see the pain in her eyes as she worried the place wouldn't be standing in the morning. "I'm sure it'll turn out fine," I said. The front door creaked open. The sound of the high-pitched squeak reminded me of the time I'd agreed to spray the hinges down with WD-40 for Bill, Jenny's late husband, in exchange for a free shot after last call. He probably knew I'd never get around to it, but he let it slide. My mind wandered to his always smiling face. If he thought that I was the town kook, he never let it show. The searing heat from outside brought me back to reality as Sheriff Brown made his presence known. The little tuft of gray hair under his nose had yellowed with tobacco exhalations, and his wrinkled skin was flushed red from the heat outside. His eyes showed a somberness that tickled my senses. Shit. He's gonna kick us out, I thought. I gulped my bourbon and slammed it on the counter for Jenny to refill, but her eyes stayed forward, locked onto the sheriff. She poured a shot of vodka and downed it in a gulp. Jenny leaned against the counter and said, "I assume you're here to tell me the winds have turned and we're all safe now, right?" As the sheriff stepped to the counter, he said, "Why don't you pour another one of those for me? And then we'll discuss this in private." Jenny nodded, holding her breath. Somewhere behind us, Sam, the other town drunk, had found the jukebox and began playing Waylon Jennings. "Cut that shit out, Sam," I scolded, but there was no stopping the music from playing. My right foot betrayed me at first, tapping along to the beat. Then my head as it swayed to the sound of the old slide guitar. When I turned back around, Jenny and the sheriff had already retreated to the office. The newly unprotected bottle of bourbon invited me to take another drink. "It'll either end up in my belly or destroyed when the fire comes. Best not to let it go to waste." "What do you think they're talking about?" Sam asked from across the bar. "If I had to guess, he's telling her to move up last call to now." "The fuck? It's hardly past 4. Why would they do that? I shot Sam a curious glance, grabbed the bottle, and walked to his table to fill his empty glass. Haven't you been watching the news? The whole gorge is up in flames. Wait, they were serious about that? Sam swallowed dry. A wave of realization swept over his face. He looked at me with fear in his eyes. What am I gonna do if this place goes? He asked. I took another swig from the bottle. I don't know. Sam looked around, confused. What's Bill gonna do without this place? Shocked, I put my hand on Sam's shoulder. Bill is dead, Sam. He died last year. Don't you remember? There was a sharp thud on the floor. We're closed, Sam said with his voice breaking as though he was going through puberty again at 55. Another knock. I walked to the door nervously, afraid the fire itself had somehow manifested and was standing on the other side to be let in, to take everything I had left to give. I put my hand on the doorknob, half expecting it to burn, but it was cool to the touch. I turned the knob only to have the door burst open. The force pushed me to the floor as a deer rushed inside with 2 fawns sauntering behind. What the hell? I asked under my breath. Well, would you look at that? Sam said with a laugh. He held out his newly filled glass of bourbon as a toast to the woodland critters that had made their way into the bar. You're all right, he said to the big one. But I'm gonna need to see the little one's ID. My hand began to shake again as I lifted myself off the ground. All the worry about the fire and my fall must have sobered me up a little. Be careful, Sam. They're wild animals and a mother deer can be vicious if she thinks its fawn are in danger. The hell is going on here? Sheriff Brown said as he emerged with Jenny from her office in the back of the bar. The fuck are wild animals doing in here? I resent that, Sam scoffed. They just walked in, probably trying to escape the fires, I said. Well, we need to get them out. The evacuation has become mandatory, so you're gonna have to leave too. Jenny silently wept behind the sheriff. But I've got nowhere else to be, Sam said. From outside, they heard a howling noise that turned into a rumble and crack. Trees were falling, consumed by the fire. Listen, Sam, it's bad outside and only getting worse. The sooner we get back to the main road, the better chance we'll be able to get out alive, the sheriff said with empathy in his voice. How about I take you down to the old mill restaurant and we'll get some bread in that belly to soak up the booze? Sam opened the half-empty bottle and tried to take another swig, but I grabbed it from his hands before the brown liquid could reach his lips and took a shot for myself. You heard the man, Sam. It's closing time. How are we going to get the deer out? If the bar goes up in flames, they'll be trapped, Jenny said. That's on them, Jenny, Brown said. He reached for the bottle in my hands and took a drink for himself. We have to worry about ourselves right now. Are you sure it's headed our way? I asked. Mason, you were once my best deputy. Don't make any more of a fool of yourself than you already have. If they say it's coming, then it's coming. His words slapped me like the heat when he'd first opened the door. My time as his deputy was the reason I'd wound up the town drunk in the first place, searching for anything to make me forget the pain of that night. With a shallow breath, I nodded. We've got to go, I said, looking at Jenny. She needed to be kept safe more than any of us. She'd already lost enough. Good. The roads are still all right for a moment, but it's smoky as all hell, so we'll have to take it slow, the sheriff said. A moment later, I was in the back of Sheriff Brown's pickup with Sam next to me and Jenny shaking in the passenger seat. I snuck a swig from my flask as Brown climbed into the truck. "Drive safe," I cautioned as I looked through the forest line. Already red and orange could be seen through the brush and trees. The fire was close. I turned back to see the doe and her fawn leaving out the open bar door and running in the other direction. "It's spreading faster than they said it would," Brown said as he started the truck and put it into drive. "Where are you taking us?" Jenny asked. "Red Cross shelter at Mount Hood Community College if we can make it," Brown said, concentrating on the thinning road ahead, fire engulfing both sides now. The old forest winded another block before Brown skidded the massive 4x4 to a stop. Sam opened his eyes. "What are you doing?" I looked ahead to see what appeared to be a man standing in the road, consumed entirely by fire, but unmoving. "There's nothing we can do for him now," I cautioned. "He's on fire, Marshall," Brown yelled. "I've got to try." Between Sam and I there was a folded blanket, and I grabbed it before heading out of the truck with the sheriff. "We can try to smother it out with this," I suggested, handing the blanket to Brown. I felt the heat as it hissed and cracked on both sides, as though nature itself was laughing at our attempts to stop it from running its course. Brown grabbed the blanket and yelled above the sound of the fire. "There's an extinguisher in the toolbox in the bed. Grab it." While I drunkenly fumbled my way onto the bed of the truck and found the extinguisher, Brown began running to the burning man ahead. I peeked my head above the cab to see the figure begin walking toward Brown as though it was an extension of the wildfire itself. "How the hell?" I asked, dumbfounded. "Get back, Sheriff!" Jenny screamed from out the window of her passenger seat. "That can't be human!" Brown either ignored her words or couldn't hear her above the crackles of fire getting louder. He threw the blanket over the figure, who tossed it to the side. It immediately went up in flames. Brown turned back to the car and began running as I pulled the cotter pin from the extinguisher. White retardant streamed out of the nozzle as I pointed it toward the flaming monster, but it fizzled and yellow flames returned as the figure chased after Brown to the truck. It reached its flaming appendage out at the frantic sheriff, and the man fell screaming in pain, his shirt engulfed in fire. I pressed the extinguisher to the flames and pulled him back to the car as the figure stood motionless once more. Sam opened the door and helped me put Brown in the back while he writhed in agony. Blood coagulated on his back, and the smell of seared flesh and hair filled the cab of the truck as I got into the driver's seat. "Are you okay to drive?" Jenny asked. I stared ahead at the motionless fire monster that seemed to wait for our next move. I swallowed dry and said, "I don't think we have a choice." I pulled the shifter into reverse and stepped on the gas, skidding the tires on the ash-covered road. "What the hell are you doing, Marshall?" Jenny asked. "You're going the wrong way." In truth, I didn't know what came over me, but something about this thing in front of me set my fight-or-flight instinct into overdrive. I think the only way we'll get to the main road is through that thing. I hit the brakes once I had some distance between us and the fire monster, who stayed unmoving, watching us. The truck now in drive, I began building speed as I focused on the red-yellow glowing man in front of us. Jenny pressed her hand against the glove box in front of her and began screaming, pushing the non-existent passenger side brakes as hard as she could. The truck barreled ahead, gaining speed as it neared the figure in the middle of the road. The monster raised his hands into the air, fire spurting out at the ends of the appendages, and he moved them forward, sending the flames out to the truck. I thought I could see the figure smiling as the heat popped the front tires, and the truck began wobbling without traction, skidding metal on asphalt as I lost control. The truck flipped onto its side with a crunch that sent my head into the side panel, knocking me unconscious for a moment. A splash of cold water on my face woke me up. My eyes struggled to focus on the figure standing over me. First Sam's chubby face with tart expression under a week's worth of stubble. Then Jenny, so innocent, undeserving of all the terrible things that seemed to follow her. She'd aged so much since Bill had died. The youthful glow of her skin had faded under the fluorescent lamps of the bar. "What happened?" I asked. "That fucking monster is what happened," Sam said as he offered a hand to help me stand up. I took the help and found a chair nearby. Still dazed, my head and neck throbbed from the truck turning over. "We're back at the bar?" I asked. Jenny took the remaining water from the pitcher in her hand and drank some, regaining some of her composure. She said, "We couldn't get around that thing on foot." "Sheriff Brown?" I asked as my eyes darted around the bar. Sam looked at the dirty floor and brought his weathered Seahawks hat to his chest. "He didn't make it out of the truck before the monster came," Sam gulped. "There was nothing we could do." Jenny yelped, choking on her emotions as she began to sob. I reached my hand out to console her, but she lurched away and ran to the back room. I hadn't seen her cry like that since the sheriff and I took her to the morgue to identify Bill's body. What was left of it. We'd found him in an apartment just outside of town after a gas leak had caused an explosion that had burned half the complex to the ground. He'd been with a woman who had later been identified as his sister, but by then the rumor mill had already painted him a cheater. I was brought back to the present when Sam asked, "Should we go after her?" My lungs burned, the smoke and ash threatening to choke me to death, and I assumed the others were feeling the same way. "The bar is on well water, but there might be enough to hose down the roof and walls. It might buy us some time. I'll go outside and find a hose." Slowly, I tried to stand while my aching body begged me to stay seated. My hand shook as I reached toward the front door once more, and I instinctively reached for the flask in the breast pocket of my flannel shirt. I paused to take the flask to my lips, and a thunderous banging noise made me drop it to the floor and fall back. Someone was knocking on the door. Something. We heard the knocking again, this time so loud my ears began to ring. Acid built up in my stomach and surged into my throat as I crawled back away from the door. Sam had fallen over as well and began sobbing. "I'm not ready to die." "Shut up, Sam," I yelled. "No one else is dying today." A surge of adrenaline brought my deputy instincts back from the depths of my clouded mind. "Get into the back with Jenny." I went behind the bar, found a dish towel and wetted it with some beer. The door knocked a third time and I went to it with a damp towel in hand to turn the knob just in case it was too hot to handle. There was nothing on the other side but smoke. The door knocked a third time and I went to it with a damp towel in hand to turn the knob just in case it was too hot to handle. There was nothing on the other side but smoke. I looked around at the empty parking lot and saw two fiery figures standing at the forest line. "It's here, isn't it?" Sam asked. "There's two of them now," I said, shocked at my own words. "What are they?" "It's Bill," Jenny said from beside me. "The hell are you talking about?" I asked, thinking she must have taken to the bottle in the office room. "He's come to take me for what I did," Jenny said. Her voice was soft, like she'd accepted her fate before we'd even begun to fight. I closed the door and deadbolted it, knowing I was sealing our tomb. "What do you mean?" I asked Jenny. She sat at the nearest table and tapped her fingernails against the tabletop lightly. "I thought he was cheating. Everyone did," she admitted with a sigh. All the signs were there. He'd be gone for days at a time. Money disappeared from the checking account without explanation. I tried to shake it off, but after a while I started noticing the way the locals were looking at me. Pity in their eyes. There goes poor Jenny, so sad that she doesn't leave his cheating ass. It was his sister though, right? I said, sitting next to her. I put my hand on hers to still the tapping of her fingernails. This time she didn't pull away. Apparently she'd been dealing with some mental health issues. She'd tried to kill herself a few times, and so he'd moved her to the apartment and was helping her settle in. His sister would call his phone at all hours of the night, any time her demons would get to her, and he'd leave. I guess he didn't want to worry me, but instead I was left to my imagination. You started the fire? I just wanted to scare him. I didn't know she'd overdosed in the bedroom. I didn't know she wasn't able to run. I figured he would learn his lesson and that would be that. Jenny began crying softly again. Oh my God, Sam said with his face aghast as he watched from a tall window on the side. They're getting closer. I couldn't take my eyes from Jenny's. You think they've come to take you? I asked. How do you know? Because I want them to. The other one is his sister? Sam asked from the window. Because it doesn't look like a girl. I patted Jenny's hand and rose from the table to see what Sam was looking at. He was right. The other figure was shorter than the first, but stout. It looked like Sheriff Brown? I muttered. Of course. Jenny laughed through her tears. He's the one who covered it up once he realized it was me. He closed the investigation, called it an accident. But why? I asked. I honestly don't know. I was ready to pay for my sins, but he took me into the interrogation room and told me he would protect me as long as he could. I guess he thought I'd be paying for what I'd done with or without a prison cell. They're almost here, Sam said. I could feel the heat in the bar rising as Jenny opened the door and stepped outside to the parking lot. We watched in horror as the two figures opened their arms and embraced Jenny, igniting her body immediately. Her screams echoed over the sound of the crackling wood beyond the fire. Somehow her silhouette remained as she burned alive, turning to ash in their squeezing inferno. The three figures turned back to the forest and began walking hand in hand into the fire. I stayed with Sam in the bar and waited to die for the rest of the night, only to find we had survived the next morning. The bar was still standing with little charred marks on the welcome mat at the front door where Bill had stood. A reminder I took with me as a lesson I learned from the Eagle Creek fire. Once again, and as always, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Irrational Fears, and of course for another episode of 31 Days of Horror. We have so much more in store for you guys this month, so make sure to tune in every day for the month of October to get a new episode every day. I'm a real good salesman. Today's episode was Lessons I Learned from the Eagle Creek Fire, written by Matthew Shuck. You can find more of his writing on Reddit under the username Smiley Doobie, and there's going to be some links down in the description. And as always, today's episode is sponsored by Audible, where you can get a free 30-day trial as well as a free audiobook by going to audibletrial.com/irrationalfears. And of course, you can find out more about the Irrational Fears project and everything we do and plan on doing and have done in the past over at irrationalfearsproject.com. So we'll see you for the next episode of 31 Days of Horror and hopefully find out together what scares you.